Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Right, it's December, Christmas time is fast approaching, and it also means that it's time to do my twice yearly champion ranking series. So far we have done 5 videos in the series. We have ranked all the 2022 buffs, 2022 new champions, we did all the class ranking relations, and we started with the tech class top 10 because that is the class that I ranked at the bottom. Now moving on to the skill class, that is what we're going to be doing today, and obviously the mandatory disclaimer that this list and these rankings are not some sort of decree or an absolute rule. These are a mixture of my personal views of the game and also current game relevance and trends. I have slightly adjusted how I do these rankings this time around, putting more emphasis on competitive game modes, because I do sincerely believe that if a champion is doing well in most competitive of the game modes, they're also going to be doing extremely well in more casual game modes, and therefore will offer plenty of value also to newer and up-and-coming players. And plus, it's also going to be future-proofing them for when they do eventually get more competitive with having these champions already ranked up. All that being said, also, we do need to keep in mind that all the champions in a game ultimately exist in a competition with each other. They are competing for our attention, for our resources, for our time to learn them, go into nuance of their ability kits and figure out their matchups. And the champions that can achieve that amongst the most competitive, the summoners, in my opinion, have gained the most value overall in the game and can truthfully consider to be the best at what they do and best of their respective classes. Now again, keep in mind, I do not work for Kabam. There will be certain amount of bias in these, no matter how I try to escape it, because I'm not basing these rankings from hard data. I do not have access to, how many fights each champion does daily in amongst the all summoners, or how frequently and how popular these champions are, or how effective. There is always going to be slight amount of bias here and personal preference, even though I do try to remain as objective as possible, frequently ranking champions that I personally do not necessarily enjoy or use higher than many of the champions that I absolutely love. Now that we are here, right, we do need to talk about skill class in general. I do think skill class is currently doing quite well in the game, but at the same time I do think that there should be something extra coming to them. That do seem relatively one-dimensional in most of the cases. They're typically nuke champions with, specific, fairly narrow sets of abilities. Now we have recently started seeing some more newer and fresher ideas around these champions. And speaking of that, I am not really going to be talking much about Mantis and Attuma in this video because they are brand new. It is going to be extremely hard to evaluate their potential in the game. I do think that Mantis definitely does have potential to be a mainstream meta champion, and potentially Attuma as well, even though that, is kind of like more up for debate at the moment. We also need to note that this time around I will be taking Aegon out of these rankings because, as I said, I am focusing more on the more competitive aspects of the game, and well, let's be frank, Aegon is not relevant right now in the game. We haven't had a new Everest type of content in a very long time. Majority of the people who plan on doing Abyss already have done it, and the people who have yet to do have plenty of alternatives at this time as well, not to necessarily warrant taking an Aegon to rank 4 in order to acquire rank 3 rank up materials, for example. So I do think that at the moment Aegon is not in top 10 and he has disappeared from this list. Speaking of the old list, our previous rankings were Kingpin, Nick, Moleman, Shang-Chi, Falcon, Hitmonkey, Stealthsuit Spider-Man, Aegon, Killmonger, Black Widow, Deadly Origins, and Masacre as a split 10th place. I think since then there has been a clear shift in how we perceive these champions. And let's get into it. Let's get down to the business, shall we? So we have skill class here. I do think skill is, as I said, very useful and powerful class, especially in the Balgon's game mode, in specific metas most namely. But there are tons of amazing champions that will not make the list, and also some quite fun and creative shoutouts. For instance, Agent Venom now with a proper synergy team can be an absolute menace in right situations. And that is kind of a shame, because we do have quite a few champions across all the classes that have become much more playable and much more fun if they are synergized up properly. But synergies and their relevance are kind of being phased out of this game in, you know, many areas. We have more content where we can only bring in 1 or 3 champions. Obviously, Battlegrounds is the new most popular, I would argue, game mode for many players. You know, absolutely does not feature synergies in any capacity. So it is cool, it is fun, but it's not necessarily as valuable as it would have been a couple of years ago that these champions have these crazy good synergies, which is also going to come into play in some of the rankings somewhat later on. But obviously, some of the champions that I think do deserve a shout out is Black Panther OG. I do think he is quite cool. I do think he has definitely like a little bit of a cult following there with a lot of dedicated players. So I do think that buff was actually, you know, quite decent. I think Blade is scheduled to make a comeback very, very soon, and I wouldn't be surprised if he makes back to top 10 list in a couple of months' time, and that has to do with the addition of a couple more dimensional beings that are both offensive and defensive threats, and Blade himself can be kind of finicky to fight. Therefore, I do think we might end up seeing much more Blade in the game, especially in Battlegrounds, in order to deal with Galen, in order to deal with Spot. I think Crossbones has been representing himself extremely well. He was very, very close to making to the top 10 list, and I do like him a lot as a character. I'm happy his bug has been finally fixed as well. And then obviously we do have also Hawkeye, who I do think has fallen off since his buff slightly, just as the nature of the beast, with him being a champion that, you know, does take his time. However, I do think he's extremely versatile in quite a few areas of the game, and definitely a champion to pay attention to, as well as I have been recently enjoying Jabari Panther somewhat more. Karnak has been doing some cool stuff. Killmonger, unfortunately, this time around does not make the list, but I do still absolutely love the character. I think he's awesome. And then, as I said, we have Mantis, who I'm not going to comment too much. Misty Knight, another champion that I do personally like a lot. I think she is quite cool and she has quite a lot to offer. I do think that Kabam would have had the opportunity to make her much more formidable, slightly adjusting her kit. And then I know that Ronan is still preferred by at least some dedicated group of players. But all that being said, let's just get into the top 10. And I'm going to start off my top 10 at the moment with a champion that I believe will end up ranking higher in near future, and that is Black Cat. I do think Black Cat has a great amount of offensive utility and power. There are some crazy things that she can do, and that is absolutely something that I'm looking for in the character on a personal note. So I do enjoy using Black Cat as well. I do have a 6-star rank 3. She does quite frequently make my Battlegrounds deck as well. At the same time, I can't say that I have seen much of her, let's say, in Alliance War or in general day-to-day questing situations. She is a champion that often does require a bit of a ramp up or more specific matchups. And one of the things that does hold her back slightly, in my opinion, is the fact that she has very, very little to no defensive value. She's quite squishy, so she's definitely kind of like an offensive nuke champion in a sense. But in that category, there are a ton of extremely capable champions that are competing for our attention and resources. And then on top of all of that, as a direct reason why one or two champions that are extremely similar by their nature are placed above her as well, is also the fact that she doesn't necessarily feels compatible with all the mastery setups. And again, she's just one of those champions that is brand new that I can fully see going up higher the more people get more comfortable with her. I do think that Black Cat suffered a very huge blow to her overall popularity and opinion from many people due to the way she was introduced in the contest as this champion, where you want to consistently punish opponents' special attacks and heavies with your own, therefore drawing a lot of parallels with Tigra, for instance, and then also placing as much emphasis on her damage potential in like Labyrinth and Abyss, when nobody really cares about Labyrinth and Abyss these days anymore, and also making her look kind of like overly complicated to what she is. I have a video titled Black Cat Made Simple for a reason, because she is much more simple character than a lot of people think. A lot of that text is just kind of a bit of fillery there. The base idea is you just want to build up to your level 2, along the way intercept your opponent or punish one of their special attacks, and that's it, then drop your level 2 pretty much, and you're gonna get, you know, majority of her potential out without complicating things. So I think when more people realize that, when more people give her a chance, when we do see her in more content, I will gladly place her higher. But as the way she is at the moment, you know, there's also a good chance that some better alternative could come along the way, or that some of the metas that we are going to have to play against in Alliance Wars and in Battlegrounds might not necessarily be compatible with her. So I do feel like, you know, starting her off at spot number 10 is a very solid place, with a definite kind of like a side note that I can easily see her climbing up this list in very near future, as more and more people are getting access to Black Cat and are kind of getting to know her and enjoy her. Let's move on to the spot number 9, and spot number 9 is going to be Stealth Suit Spider-Man. Now, Stealth Suit Spider-Man definitely has had a resurgence due to several different reasons, and obviously one of them is Battlegrounds. We haven't necessarily seen Stealth Suit Spider-Man back at Alliance War, and I don't necessarily think he will. That has to do with the fact that he is one of those glass cannon offensive only type of champions. Therefore, unfortunately, he doesn't again have much of a defensive value, because Kabam often insists on making all Spider-Man extremely squishy in this game, which is a decision that still baffles me and annoys me to no end, knowing how durable Spider-Man are considered to be in comics. But I digress. And then Stealth Suit Spider-Man, you know, obviously is not only a BG nuke option champion now. One of the reasons why he is higher than Black Cat in this situation is also the fact that Stealth Suit Spider-Man, the way he exists right now, has received some crazy good synergies, and even though the overall importance or role of the synergies has been diminished, I do feel compelled to acknowledge the synergies that he holds now with, namely Scorpion, where he can basically, you know, maintain all of his debuffs without the need of throwing special attacks and things like that. So that has given him like a massive amount of health. And then he also has a new synergy with the brand new Spidey, which can let him purify debuffs. That's basically encompassing extremely huge hit, making him Liquid Courage Double Edge friendly, because again, you don't necessarily need to throw more than one special attack in a fight anymore. You can get rid of bleed and poison from Liquid Courage Double Edge and just enjoy the damage and enjoy the profit. And it's kind of like the situation with Agent Venom, where it's very cool and when you can pull it off, but it's not something that you will necessarily do at all times. However, in near future, with New Alliance War season starting and him being one of the debuff detox characters, I can potentially see him making his return to Alliance War as well, now that I think about it a bit more clearly, because he does obviously synergize extremely well with the Scorpion, who is also extremely capable Alliance War attacker. So, who knows? There's going to be plenty to see, but I do think that Stealth Suit Spider-Man is regaining his ground, is regaining his popularity. There's lots to like about the character. He's a very viable rank 4 candidate now, as being like, you know, good Battlegrounds nuke, and also extremely utilitarian questing champion as such. And yeah, he gets spot number 9. Spot number 8 in this list is going to be Hitmonkey. And Hitmonkey, again, is yet one more time one of those champions that got a completely new lease of life. He was basically already back and down at the waysides of MCOC, starting to gather dust, and all of a sudden Battlegrounds come out, he starts nuking everything down, and people are like, oh hey, Hitmonkey, this guy's awesome. And I can promise you that we have seen more Hitmonkey rank ups in the last 4 or 5 months than we saw in the last year or two, and that is largely because of Battlegrounds. The best thing about Hitmonkey, ultimately, with the main reason that made me reconsider pretty much the last minute and place him above Black Cat, is the fact that he is compatible with Liquid Courage Double Edge. Now, unfortunately, he still falls in the category of very squishy glass cannon skill nukes, and ultimately I do think that every single one of the first 3 champions could be interchanged based on your personal preferences, but I do think that each and one of those 3 champions have, you know, kind of like the stronger sides in comparison. And the fact that, you know, Hitmonkey does greatly benefit from any artificial attack increases, does make him more viable in the current modern day content, as well as the fact that he can freely shrug off Liquid Courage Double Edge. Therefore, he can be one of the best and most effective and scariest nukes in existence for Battlegrounds. And that is kind of the deciding factor. Ultimately, I do see more hit monkeys specifically in Battlegrounds than I see Black Cats and then I see Stealth Suit Spider-Man. That's why, that I used as a tiebreaker. At the same time, again, I would not argue much about if somebody wants to play Stealth Suit Spider-Man above him or Black Cat above him either. I do think that all of these first three champions are basically extremely closely knit together with much more in common than what sets them apart. And Hitmonkey's definitely living his best monkey life right now in the game, about as good as it will get for him. And now, just the same thing that I said for the first three entries in this video, I must say for the next four champions, where I think almost all of them can be interchanged. So spots number 7 to 4 have fairly minor differences there. It is largely preference based. I do, however, would want to insist on these segments where I do think that the bottom three are the bottom three in whatever order that you want to select them in. And then I think that spots number 4 to spot number 7, again, are the spots number 4 to 7. And they should not be placed lower. They should not go higher because skill class, in my opinion, does have a fairly set, concrete top 3. And we're going to start with the 7th. And 7th spot is going to be Falcon, because Falcon is still chugging along. He is obviously a fairly common mainstay Battlegrounds offensive champion as well. Speaking of the competitive nodes, he does counter a ton of nodes in the game. But the thing that, in my opinion, puts Falcon ahead of the bottom three champions is that he's also more present in, let's say, Alliance War, because he does get quite a bit of usage there by countering quite a few specific nodes or abilities, because he can, completely bypass virtually everything. And that lock-on is extremely powerful ability that at this moment in the game is still pretty much uniquely unrivaled, in the sense that it activates and you can have it up from the very first hit in the fight, and that is huge. That means with Falcon's lock-on, you can, for instance, fairly straightforward take on nodes like Hazard Shift or Biohazard or any other node where you would receive a large amount of penalty should you, for instance, hit into the opponent, but that lock-on can absolutely bypass it. Now, for a while, Falcon stock, I do think, was starting to fall out quite drastically because Kabam kept introducing these champions or setups where you could not reduce their ability accuracy, or we have like Penny Parker that, ignores ability accuracy specifically for auto blocks and stuff like that. I'm very happy that Kabam has kind of stopped doing that, and ultimately over time he does accumulate more and more content where he can be used. He's one of those champions that's not necessarily your favorite or go-to option. What would you ideally want to use for some specific fights, but he's definitely one of those champions that is extremely valuable to have on your tool belt, and when you need him, he's going to be there. He does put in honest day's work, which ultimately I ended up valuing higher than, skill nukes, because I do think that you can get by easier without Hitmonkey, Stealthy, or Black Cat than you would without Falcon when push comes to shove. So there we go. We have Falcon at spot number 7. And spot number 6. Spot number 6 is a sad story a bit. Spot number 6 is going to be Mallman. Now, the reason why Mallman... Well, first of all, I used to place Mallman in split 2nd or 3rd place, and then in 3rd place, and he was at the top of the skill class. There was absolutely no question about it. He embodied everything you might want from a skilled champion at one good old time. He had access to shock and bleed, he had access to powerful shrug-off abilities, guaranteed crits, plenty of damage, and also, as I have mentioned, more and more relevant recently, he had plenty of defensive utility as well, because he can hold his own, stall out the fights, and be quite nasty because of his shrug-off abilities, because you can't hit him on the block with majority of the champions when you're fighting against him. And all of that matters, and all of that came together to make Mole Man insanely amazing. But then Kabam, after a year plus, bug fixed him. And now he did lose a very critical aspect of his kit. Well, he still kind of has it, but the problem is now you're forced to choose in between damage and your ability to bypass, evade. And that absolutely does suck. Mole Man is still a great champion, as evident by his ranking. There is no doubt about it. He's still great for battlegrounds. He's still great for a ton of questing content. And he's still great, even for Alliance Wars, we do see him there as well. So in all of the competitive game modes, he is still present, just significantly less. Because now anymore, you can't be nuking champions down with a guaranteed evade counter. And that, combined with the fact that also for the damage you are sacrificing your debuff, shrug-off ability, ultimately does make him unable to do some of the fights well, or as well as he used to. And that definitely has been, felt quite frequently. There have been plenty of nodes, there have been plenty of champions where you would absolutely 100% pick Mole Man as your, favorite or go-to option before the change, and you absolutely do not want to do that after the change. So they did kind of castrate him a bit, and there's no escaping it. At the same time, he's still capable. He still has majority of the things you want from a skilled champion. There's great damage, there's bleed, there's guaranteed crits, there's shrug-offs, there's access to unstoppable as well, there's shock immunity. He does a lot. He is good. He's very good. He's just not as good as he used to. Because Kabam just, did partial, vasectomy to him. But here we are. That's Mole Man now. Still capable. Still definitely worth the rank 3 or rank 4. But just not quite as high up anymore. And it is quite sad thing. It's like moment of silence for Mole Man. Alright then. Let's move on to our top 5. As I said, 5th and 4th and 6th and 7th spots in my head are at the moment very close. But on spot number 5, at the moment, I'll put in Valkyrie. And Valkyrie is a new champion, so she might be enjoying the benefits of that brand new champion smell, when you freshly unbox something. But at the same time, I do think that there is undeniable evidence of Valkyrie's prowess in several of the most important game modes at the moment. She is pretty much de facto the best unstoppable counter that counters the unstoppable without a need of a debuff or something, else, or like some specific buffs there, or nullifying them or anything like that. Just get to the combo meter of 10 if she's a Sig 200, and that's it. Unstoppable doesn't exist. That is very cool, but ultimately the reason why she is ranked as highly as she is, it's because of Alliance War. We know for a fact already that she will be able to take a ton of fights where very few other champions could. She might not necessarily be the fastest at it, especially in these, hard fights where, we have some difficult encounter in Hazard Shift, for instance, where you absolutely cannot strike opponent. You can get that fight done just by hitting that block, and you can do it fairly effectively and safely. There's also a very huge emphasis on safely, because there are a ton of champions that could get the job done frequently in Alliance War, but we don't often use them because they're either not as reliable or they may be a bit squishy and stuff like that. And Valkyrie doesn't really suffer from it. She has very solid HP, very safe gameplay, very kind of like controlled playstyle, I would argue, especially once you get used to her. And obviously, then there's also the fact that she is a good Battlegrounds champion. I do think her Battlegrounds ability is somewhat overhyped at the moment due to Rich Get Richer meta, but at the same time, definitely even in other metas, she has her value in there. I don't necessarily end up running her in like every single scenario. For instance, at the moment, I don't have Valkyrie in my deck, but I do think that she is plenty capable for battlegrounds, primarily offensively or exclusively offensively. I would say she is offensive champion, but I do think that the thing that puts her above likes of Black Cat and Stealth Suit Spidey and Hit Monkey at the moment is the fact that she already has extremely noticeable high tier Alliance War presence. And then obviously on top of it, Valkyrie does benefit from more and more new content being compatible with her. Kabam seems to like recently adding the invade nodes or other interesting combinations of nodes that enhances your block damage and stuff like that. And then obviously Kabam is still very, very huge fans of spamming Unstoppable in a lot of content, which is something that Valkyrie again is amazing at. So I do think this is where she is now. I do think also that she could go slightly down, but I don't really see that happening because of Alliance War. I'm very confident that she's going to be consistent option for a lot of Alliance War stuff. And therefore, a very, very successful addition to skill class in general at the moment. Moving on to spot number 4. Spot number 4 is going to raise some eyebrows, I think, because I think a lot of you have noticed me talking about a specific champion quite a bit recently, and also yesterday releasing, in my opinion, excellent argument for today's placement. And I will put Masacre above Valkyrie, as I have openly stated that I do think Masacre overall is the better champion, all things considered. And also, this is a very big departure of how we viewed Masacre in relation of Black Widow Deadly Origins. Black Widow Deadly Origins is still a very great champion, especially for questing stuff, because she just seems to answer a ton of things that are required in like Act 7 and Act 8. But so does Masacre. But unlike Black Widow Deadly Origins, Masacre definitely has found a complete new wave of popularity, complete, new home. I do think he's one of the most versatile and dangerous battlegrounds attackers specifically. I do think that, we have on occasion seen him in Alliance War, but I will give Valkyrie Alliance War any day of the week. I do think she is better for Alliance War. I do, however, think Masacre is better for more of the general questing stuff. And I also definitely do think that Masacre is the better battlegrounds champion. As I said before, you can easily swap them around. There are arguments based on which game mode you value more. But Masacre has been absolutely beastly. In the hands of good player, you do not ever know which one of your champions is safe. And that is the kind of more terrifying thing of Masacre, where a good Masacre player is going to nuke down your random man thing, for instance. A matchup you would initially never think that he can do. Then he's going to nuke down a thing and a Penny Parker, and you're going to think, but but Penny's Incinerate immune. Well, it doesn't matter. His block damage is insane, and he replaces Incinerates with a burst of damage. And he's absolutely lethal. I do fully expect him, when it comes to battlegrounds, to be more and more visible, more and more in forefront, because I know from experience, when you're playing against some of the best players in the world, he is a very, very often a ban candidate, just because of how terrifying the idea is of a skilled player holding Masacre in his draft as one of their 7 champions. So he can finish fights in like 25 or 30 seconds. He can nuke down a lot of tanky champions that you think would be safe. When you draft a bunch of your Mystics, for instance, or Science champions, well, especially like Mystics or, Penny or whatever, and you look at the opponents like, opponent doesn't have a good Cosmic counter to Penny. Well, he doesn't need one because he has Masacre. You're holding Man-Thing or Sasquatch, and all of a sudden Masacre just nukes them. And that is extremely debilitating, and in my opinion speaks for the quality of the champion. So we are seeing more and more of this guy being incorporated in more and more of the top player decks. I do think that it requires a fairly good amount of confidence in your ability and knowledge about the AI interactions and how to use him to his best. But yeah, I think he has proved himself. I can't promise that he will always be here or as high as I place him right now, but I'm doing this ranking for right now. And currently, I do believe him to be 4th best skilled champion. It's extremely high on my potential rank up options as well. In fact, the only reason I ranked up Valkyrie above Masacre was because Valkyrie was the only champion that could contribute to my prestige. If it was not, a matter of me trying to be useful to my alliance, I would have ranked up Masacre over him, as well as somebody who largely does focus on battlegrounds. And all there is to it. Dude's an animal. And if you don't believe me, check out the video uploaded yesterday. Right, and now we are at top 3, which I also do think ultimately are kind of like slightly ahead of the rest of the class. So as I said, so basically have all of this top 10 in 3 different segments. We have 1 to 3, we have 4 to 7, and then we have the bottom 3s. And in between those segments, I can easily understand some people wanting to interchange some of those champions. Black Cat should be above Hitmonkey or something like that. Fair. I think that there are good arguments for that. I think there are good arguments for the order that I made as well. So we're going to start with top 3. And top 3, in my personal opinion, is Shang-Chi. Because Shang-Chi, and here again is going to be one of those full disclosure things. I am not the biggest fan of Shang-Chi. I do have him at rank 3. I know how to use him. I do use him on occasion. And I absolutely recognize how good he can be. At the same time, there's just something that I don't necessarily enjoy with him. Or if there are other viable options, I often will go with that. But all that being said, he is a monster. He is an absolute utility and damage machine combination. He is primarily an offensive champion, not primarily, exclusively an offensive champion. He has virtually no defensive significance, which, is quite unfortunate. But ultimately, the reason why he is in the 3rd spot and why he is above the rest of the champions is fairly straightforward here. In every game mode, he is an option, he works, and people use him. We do see plenty of Shang-Chi in Battlegrounds, we do see plenty of Shang-Chi in Alliance War, we do see a ton of Shang-Chi and in challenge type of content, like Eternity of Pain, for instance, and also, general questing situations. He is a solid option to be used with his easy access to stun and the control of the fight that he has. And great thing again about him is, similarly to Hitmonkey, he can easily purify Liquid Courage Double Edge. He has access to extremely reliable and even stackable slow. Unblockable is an amazing bit of utility a lot of people overlook about this guy, that also enables him tackling a lot of fights you wouldn't necessarily want your skilled champions to go up against, such as, the tech class with all of their auto blocks and special attacks and things like that. So yeah, I do think that Shang-Chi as a champion is definitely a successful addition, important addition to the skill class, and is proving his value and worth day in and day out. The cool thing about him is also you don't necessarily have to have him awaken, just like Masacre, for instance, or Mole Man. So I do like that quite a lot about skill class in general, that many of their champions do not necessarily need to be awakened. And then, just breaking his kit, there is just about perfect amount, I would say. It is unfortunate that his level 1 is a bit of a skip, and so is his level 3 in most cases. He is basically get special to a nuke type of champion, but the cool thing about him is obviously that the longer the fight goes, the more his damage increases as well, based on how many critical hits he has landed in the fight. Then on top of that, he has extremely easy access to every single bit of his utility, which is ultimately what matters. He has like his 4 kind of like main things that he do, you know, reliable stuns even through block, thus giving you extra openings, access to unblockable, that's, you know, bypassing auto block or a ton of another annoying things. Cleansing debuffs and purifying them, and having these cleanse charges enable him to take a ton of different fights. And then obviously access to slow, completely shutting down evades and unstoppables. And all of that's on the palm of your hand. As comparison here, a champion that I do like to slag off a bit on my channel, we have like Jubilee. And if you look at her abilities, she has like 3 abilities based on what surge she is in. She has 3 different abilities on her level 1 based on, you know, what surge you're in when you throw it, and then 3 more abilities on her level 2 for each of the different surges, and then a handful of extra abilities. So, you know, Jubilee might have 15 abilities to Shang-Chi's, let's say, 5. But Shang-Chi is miles and miles and miles better as a champion, just because everything that he does, it's super easy to access at virtually any given point. And it's reliable, and it's effective, and he just works. And that is Shang-Chi. I cannot quite comprehend why I don't like this character more than I do. That's the weird thing about this guy. Everything that I say about him is something that I absolutely love in a champion. So it is a bit of an odd one. I think it's quite cool, but I just don't know. Something is holding me back there. But here we are. Shang-Chi, in my opinion, is the 3rd best skill champion. And the top 2, well, let's just be honest, I don't think the top 2 has changed at all whatsoever. I do think that Nick has regained some of his vigor in other game modes, though, and I do have to say that wholeheartedly. There was a period of nearly a year, I would say, where we virtually never saw Nick on Alliance War offense, and we do see him on attack again now. So I am absolutely happy about that. I'm glad that he has regained some of his offensive use based on the metas that we have. And obviously Nick is just one of those champions that is clearly being loved by Kabam more than most. He has crazy good stats. He has crazy good kits of utility and abilities. And the only kind of annoying thing that, you know, disqualifies him from Battlegrounds is the fact that in order to access True Nick, you do need to get your life model decoy destroyed, and then you're playing with lower health, which is just kind of incompatible, really, with the Battlegrounds scoring system and how the game mode works. But at the same time, you know, even with life model decoy, if you do have deep wounds, Nick is plenty capable offensively if you are in a pinch, especially against, you know, Science Champions or Avengers. But the reason why we don't ever or almost never use Nick on attack is just how gosh darn valuable he is defensively. Now, there are a handful of metas, typically the metas where we do have some potential for artificial attack increase when Nick does not necessarily perform as well as some other defenders would. But I think, consistently speaking, he has been one of the staple, one of the best defenders for Battlegrounds, just with the virtue of those 2 health bars. And then on top of it, obviously, also, you know, block damage, his level 1s, and the fact that he can go unblockable and also go stun immune in his second life. All of those do increase the complexity of this fight. I think at large, community has gotten a million times better against fighting Nick Fury. But no matter how good you are, you can't get around the fact that, you know, it's still going to take quite a while to get him down compared to most other champions in the game. So Nick definitely has a ton of defensive value. He's a defensive staple in Alliance War, a defense beast in Battlegrounds, and also plenty of offensive value across the entire game. You see him and can use him easily for much of the content that's designed for skill class, because he does have plenty powerful Purify abilities. He does have access to damage over time effect and disorients, so he's largely compatible with majority of the new content being released, like Act 7, Act 8. And at the same time, he functions, works, and is extremely important for all of the competitive game modes as well. Hence, he's here. Nick's great, Nick's awesome. For a long time, easily, unanimously hailed as the king of skill class. And rightfully so, because he is absolutely amazing. And also one of my personal favorites in a sense. At the same time, there was a buff that came around and initially seemed quite unassuming. Reading through that buff, reading through Kingpin's abilities, you don't even see what the fuss is about. And it took a lot of people a long time to realize how powerful this guy is, even after the buff. But ultimately, I do think he's one of the best buffs Kabam has done ever. I do think he's one of the best champions in the game at the moment, period. And I will go as far as to make a claim that he is the only champion in the game that has functioned extremely well in every single Battlegrounds meta that we have, both offensively and defensively. Now, there have been a handful of metas where he wasn't as difficult of a defender. For instance, Crit Me With Your Best Shot, or a handful of others. But he was the only champion in-game so far that could easily make your deck in every single meta and function as a two-way character and do it, you know, extremely well. And the same happened this season. You know, you would think, okay, you lose some of his level 1 utility in Mega Masacre's meta, he's still gonna nuke down people and get easy openings with his Unstoppables. If you need intercepts, he was very capable of doing that, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, what makes him so good? Well, it's fairly simple yet effective. He does have increased combat power rate, which is quite helpful as a defender as well as attacker. Then obviously, one of the most important features of Kingpin is the fact that he purifies debuffs placed on you. And even though on base without synergy is only 60% chance to purify, also the fact that you purify all debuffs on you when you reach total of 8 debuffs or / rage charges basically covers that ground where if there is a struggling debuff that gets through, in more often than not, you will be able to get rid of it pretty much immediately, especially if you utilize your level 2 strategy where you can quickly gain rage charges as you are striking your opponent. And therefore, he is one of those champions that's, you know, pseudo debuff immune in a very positive way that also gives him extra damage. So he does kind of have like that ghost aspect to it in a sense even. Then obviously easy access to Unstoppable, which does in fact matter more and more because he does benefit from easy, foolproof, guaranteed intercept and guaranteed openings where you can just, you know, wait for opponent, dash in at you, hit your block once, hit them, and that will count as an intercept. And ultimately, I do think that one of the most important party tricks that Kingpin does hold is also his level 1. Because of his level 1 being as effective as it is, he just works against majority of the opponents and majority of the nodes you can utilize your level 1 against. What it does, it's fairly simple. It is a damage over time degeneration that causes a fairly significant amount of damage, but most importantly, it reduces their attack by 50%, therefore a lot of punishing abilities or chip damage or occasional level 3 to the face hurts a lot less. And it also reduces their defensive ability accuracy by 65%, which lets him bypass stuff like safeguard, things, protections, you know, Korgs, rock field damage, so on and so forth. And ultimately, he is a champion that can do a ton of fights. That is where his, like, usefulness lies. There are tons of champions that he can go up against thanks to the mixture of his Purify ability and level 1. For instance, you can use him against Immortal Abominations, you know, Man-Things, and ton of champions he was not necessarily meant to be amazing for. that is why Kingpin works. And if you need any more examples, we can go over his resume. He is powerful enough to be on the blacklist in Alliance Wars. So clearly does well in a competitive Alliance War game mode. He is a mainstay staple, as I mentioned, in every single Battlegrounds deck at a high level that I have seen. He is one of the best default questing champions in terms of how many fights he handles. He has been crazy good at taking a ton of challenging content like Eternity of Pain, so on and so forth. And he's one of the very, very, very few champions in the game where I would argue that he doesn't really have a game mode where he's bad at. I suppose the best arguments are he's not particularly great for Everest content, but Everest content at the moment is not really relevant in the game to begin with. And secondly, he does well enough. His damage output on base is quite high and also easy to overlook and underestimate. And obviously, if you do happen to have some specifically suitable matchups for Kingpin that does give him access to a ton of debuffs, that absolutely skyrockets his damage output. So that's why Kingpin might not look the most impressive as a champion and also based on his abilities, but nobody can beat his resume in skill class. Absolutely no one. He does the most in the most places in the game. And he does it goddamn well. So that's why Kingpin. One final thing. Also, synergy roll has been reduced and I don't mention them much, but Mr. Sinister synergy with Kingpin is just a different level of stupid in right conditions. If you haven't tried it out in Act 7, you definitely should. Anyways, that's it. Kingpin is the best skill champion in the game by far, in my opinion. Right. So we have the old ranking. Here are the new rankings. Spot number 1, Kingpin. Number 2 is Nick Fury. Number 3 is Shang-Chi. Then we have Masacre, Valkyrie, Moleman, Falcon, Hitmonkey, Stealth Suit, Black Cat. And obviously, honorable mentions definitely have to go to Black Widow, Deadly Origins, Crossbones, Misty Knight, Jabari Panther, and a whole bunch of others. Skill class is a very cool and fun class, and I look forward to seeing what kind of impact Mantis and Atuma will have on skill class in the game. And that is it for now. I will catch you guys later. Let me know what you guys think. See ya. Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about the